Hello, everyone. Welcome to this DataFlex Dashboards live stream. It's good to have you all here. And let me shortly introduce. I'm sitting here, of course, on this couch, but I'm now at this moment, I'm sitting here by myself. Because later after this live stream, I will also be joined by Henry. And Henry is the main developer that has been working on the dashboards in DataFlex. And I will also be joined by Harm, who of course also knows everything about dashboards in DataFlex. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the YouTube chat so we can answer all those questions about dashboards. And during this live stream, we are also teaming up with our channel partners because worldwide we have several DataFlex channel partners. And this live stream, we're teaming up with Data Access North America. And we have Dennis. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, Yolanda. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great.
I want you to ask you to introduce the rest of this live stream.
All right. Again, hello, everybody, and good morning. We're going to be watching a EDUC presentation from 2024 about dashboards and show you how to create gorgeous dynamic dashboards using standard DataFlex code. We are going to be monitoring the chat in the YouTube live stream, and we're going to be answering some questions directly in there. And we will also be answering some other questions in a live Q&A after the video. And also, all of the questions are going to be posted later on the DataFlex.dev website. If your chat doesn't show up, please refresh your browser, and it should solve that problem. Okay, so let's start the presentation.
Okay, good. That's it. Are there any questions? Okay, so obviously I'm messing around a little bit here. That's not it. We've got a full hour ahead of us. I have the honor of filling the last slot of this already great day with a full hour talk. And we're going to be spending that hour talking about dashboards, specifically dashboards in DataFlex. But before we actually get to the DataFlex portion of this talk, let's first take a little step back, look at some inspiration, and ask ourselves, well, what exactly is a dashboard? Well, this is a dashboard. This is a dashboard. This is a dashboard. And this is also a dashboard. But what do all of these things have in common? Well, for one, they sure look fancy. And they all seem to contain some sort of combination of graphs, lists, and then some big text. But mostly, it's about these little things. Small, reusable building blocks, we call them widgets, that populate a screen, and together they form a hub of information and quick access. Now you're probably wondering, Henry, what the hell? Why are you showing me all of these dashboards? Why are you telling me this? Why are we even spending time on this? I know what a dashboard looks like. I know what it does. Why are we doing this? Well, I think it is important to look at these pieces of inspiration so we can, from that, formulate a goal for us to work towards. So let's talk a little bit about the goal. And the top-level goal is actually very simple to define. We can condense it down into just one simple sentence. We want to make user-configurable dashboards a possibility in DataFlex. And we actively started working on this goal roughly about a year ago. But this is a top-level goal, and this goal is pretty big. It's not very specific, is it? So what we should be doing is we should be dissecting this goal into more manageable, easier to achieve goals. So we can ask ourselves questions like, well, what should it be capable of and what should it contain? And when you start answering these questions, you'll come to realize that most of the answers that you're going to give fall into one of two categories, one of them being goals for the developer and the other one being goals for the end user. So let's start with the most important one, our goals for the developer. We want to provide you with a simple component that you can add to a view, and this component on its own should facilitate most of what you need to make a dynamic dashboard in your application a reality. We want to provide you with a framework to build these building blocks, these widgets, which sounds simple, but as we progress along this presentation, you'll come to realize that this actually goes pretty deep. We want to allow the developer to define rules for adding and configuring these widgets. We want you to be able to inject things like permissions from your users when it comes to adding and configuring widgets. And we want to provide you with multiple ways to load and store dashboard configurations. The overarching theme here is that we want you to worry about the business logic of your application. We want you to worry about making your dashboard look nice and filling it with all kinds of fancy widgets. We don't want you to worry about how should I even get going and building a dashboard and how does all of the user interaction work. That's for us, not for you. What about the end user then? Well, for the end user, we want to give them the power to define their dashboard the way they like it. And we're going to do this by giving them the option to add, remove, move, and resize widgets. And they should be able to configure widgets through things like data filtering, sorting, etc. Obviously, all of this within the constraints set by you guys, by the developer. The main goal for the end user is that he should be presented with a sleek user experience. The dashboard should look good, and it should be intuitive. It should function the way they'd expect it to. Okay, so now that we have some goals defined, sub-goals for us to work towards, let's talk a little bit about the underlying tech that makes the dashboard framework work. What do we need to accomplish all of this? Well, for one, we need these widgets to be able to be created and destroyed at runtime. We need some sort of fancy logic to position, move, and resize these widgets. And we need an easier way to build these damn widgets. Now, even though this is just 3 bullet points, when you think about what all of these things imply, you'll quickly realize that, wow, this has actually a lot of required tech. Well, what if I told you we've actually been working on this for much longer than just a year? This goes back maybe 4 or 5 years or so ago. So let me take you on a trip, roughly 4 or 5 years ago. We built the web dynamic object container. Now, I think Harm did a very good job explaining what this thing does in his presentation this morning, so I'm briefly just going to very quickly recap and then move on. We added this in DataFlex 19.0 as a library, and then in DataFlex 20, it is now part of the products, where you can add it from the class palette directly into your view. And this thing allows for dynamic creation and deletion of web controls at runtime. I pulled some text from a presentation that I did, I think, a year ago about this thing as well. And in that presentation, I wrote, this is useful when large part of a view are not set in stone. Okay. You have an unknown number of complex objects that can be put into a web list. Sounds useful. And then I also wrote, this is very handy for custom user dashboards. Hint, hint. The main thing this thing does for you is that it prevents creating tons of objects and then hiding them with PB render. So what we would see when people would mimic the usability of a user dashboard in the past, what they would do is they would create a view, they would add like 20 different objects in there, and then depending on what user was logged in, what permissions he had, what roles and rights were associated to this user, they would go through each of these objects and they would set PB render to either true or false, and at the end, 6 or 7 of these objects would still be visible, but all 20 of these objects actually exist. So 1, the code isn't very pretty, and 2, it's also not very efficient. It could be done better. Dynamic Object Container solves that situation. If you want to know more about the Dynamic Object Container, Harm did a very good explanation about this, but we also have a little sample in the web order workspace. We've built a little shopping cart there, so you can look at that if you want to know more about the Dynamic Object Container. So that took us about a year, and we've been incrementally tweaking and improving this thing over the years as well. And then after that year, we built the drag and drop framework. Again, this was already displayed beautifully this morning, so I'm going to keep it very brief. We added this in DataFlex 2022, And this thing basically gave you HTML5 drag and drop functionality directly through DataFlex code. You don't need to do any sort of JavaScript. You don't need to know CSS or HTML. Directly through DataFlex code, you get drag and drop support in your application. The idea is that you add a small C web drag drop helper to your view. You mark which part of your interface you want to be able to pick up. We call them drag sources. And where you want to drop them, we call them drop targets. You implement on drop, and you're done. So you can pick up parts of your interface and drop them pretty much anywhere. You can drag rows from lists, items from tree views, and tags from tags forms. You can drop them pretty much anywhere, but we have some special actions for those three. The main gain you get from this is that you get a much more intuitive way of interacting with your data. So one of the examples I always like to give is something that we frequently saw, is that you would have two lists side by side, and you would want to be able to move items from one list to the other. And the solution that people were using back then was, okay, you place two buttons in the middle with arrows pointing in either direction. You select an item in one list, click the button, and it would go to the other list. Now with drag and drop, you can get rid of those two buttons, and then straight away pick up one item in a list and drop it right in the other list. Okay, so now we have drag and drop and the dynamic object container. So we got to work on what is now called the grid layout. This was again displayed quite nicely this morning, so I'm going to keep it very brief. We added this in DataFlex 23, so this is pretty recent, and is a new positioning system for the web app framework. It provides you with an alternative to flow layout, where you position your controls using columns, and you basically build your view from the top left to the bottom right with no real vertical space in between. And that was one of the caveats of the flow layout. You really didn't have much control over the vertical positioning of your controls, unless you were willing to jump through a few hoops to make it happen. Now, grid layout aims to solve that, and as you saw in this morning's presentation, this is already very nicely integrated in eStudio's web app designer. And the basic idea is that you define a grid, say 6 columns and 6 rows, which gives you 36 cells. And if you want to place an item directly in the bottom right corner of your screen, you just put the control in that cell, and it'll just be there through the magic of grid layouts. All right, so now we have all 3 components that we need to build a dashboard, right? We need something to make building widgets easier. So we created what is called composite classes. And this is new. We are adding a new keyword to the DataFlex language called the composite. And it kind of looks like this. You're just saying composite, in this case, see my first widget, is a C web widget. And then from there on, you're basically going to write a class as if you were writing an object. So directly inside this composite, you are going to place your child objects, your properties, your procedures, your functions, just like you would with an object inside a view. This is how you build a composite. Now, when you create an instance of this composite, say you put an object declaration of this composite inside a view, all of the stuff that you've defined in that composite, all of these sub-objects that are present, also immediately get created and rendered for you. These composites, as you might have spotted, are used as the base building block for widgets. And we've also already included lots of studio support for this. We've got a working designer, so if you're working in a composite and you press F7, you actually go into designer and you start working visually as if you were building a view, for example. We also have a working code explorer, so within the composite, you can use the code explorer and jump directly to a sub-object, to a procedure inside the code. All that works. And when you start working with composites, you might think, well, this actually looks like simple construct object mapping, doesn't it? And you're partially correct, but just know that we've been tinkering a bit, and there is some black magic going on under the hood that makes a couple of cool things possible. So I've got a little code snippet here. This is a more fleshed out composite. You can see that it already has an object in there, a list, but there's 2 things that stand out in this code, and I'll very briefly give you a moment. Can anyone see one of the 2 things that stand out in this code? If you were in the training yesterday, please give the other people a chance. Anybody? That's the 3rd one, actually. But yes, nested procedure is one of them as well. The fact that you can define the on-row click without having to actually make a completely new class for it. Yeah. Well, here we go, data awareness. Well, so you were very close, yeah. These things, they can be data aware. You can put a data dictionary in there, And because you can use data dictionaries, because you can make these things data aware, you can also use entry items on this web column in the list. And the second one is this web register path instruction right here. These things, they can perform navigations as well. And while this all sounds very logical, like it should be able to do this, right? This actually cost us quite a bit of work to get right. So there's that. Okay, so now that we've discussed all of the underlying tech, what makes dashboards tick under the hood, let's actually look at the protagonists, the components that make up the new dashboards module. So I hope this is legible, but I'll read it out loud as well. We are adding 5 new classes to the DataFlex web app framework. We are adding the C web widgets container, the web widgets container internal, the web widgets configuration wizard, and the web widget palette. Let's look at all of these a little bit more in detail. Fair disclaimer, this is going to be a bit more of a top-level view, so don't expect to know everything by the time I'm done with talking about these things. So first off, the C web widget container. This is where the magic happens. This is the thing. This is the thing that you add to your view, and by doing this, you've already unlocked about 80% of what you need to do to make dynamic dashboards a possibility in your application. This will be your main API for the module, and here you'll find instructions like load configuration, to load a dashboard configuration into the container, and save configuration. This thing manages widget administration. You manipulate this administration by using functions like register widget, which lets the container know, okay, well, I've built this little widget here, this composite, and at some point I want to add this widget visibly to my dashboard. So here it is. Now that you know about it, you can add it later. And actually adding it is then done by using add widget. This makes a visual instance of that widget on your dashboard. The web widget container creates a single instance of the web widget container internal upon creation. And this is where the magic really happens. This is the guy that does all the heavy lifting. This is an internal widget container component. It is managed by the widget container wrapper class. And whenever a widget gets added, whenever a widget gets moved or resized, this is the guy in the background that actually makes all of that happen. We don't want you to worry about this thing too much, though. This thing just lives in your code. It does its thing, is working very hard. If you spot it in your code somewhere, don't wonder where it came from. It just lives there, but you're going to be communicating with the widget container mostly. Next up is the C web widgets. And this is the stuff that populates your dashboard. These are these blocks that go onto the screen. And they are basically their own tiny little ecosystem. So bringing up that code snippet again, these things, they can contain one or more controls, multiple controls, and they support data dictionaries. These things can be data-aware controls because of them, and they can perform navigations. And they're created by you. We expect you to use the framework that we provide to create these widgets, and you can get as creative with it as you like. If you want to make a widget that just has a simple button in there that performs a navigation to a view, that's a widget. Want to put a list in there of your latest customers? That's a widget. Want to put a chart control in there that shows you your profits from your last week? That's a widget. Want to get all 3 of those into one big widget? You can also do that. Get creative. You can build whatever you like with it as if it's a view. You build it using composites, and really it is almost like you're building a view. It'll feel very familiar. The C web widget palette is a weblist subclass that is specifically designed for working with web widgets. And this thing attaches to your web widget container. And it's the good kind of lazy because it takes a lot of work off your hands. This thing is pre-styled, so it looks nice. And it fills itself with the container's registered widgets. So all of the widgets that you register with the container keeps an internal list. This palette reads that list and then fills its own list with all the registered widgets. And it comes with built-in drag and drop support, which is what you saw me do right at the start, where I drag an item off that list directly into my dashboard to add a widget to my container, to my dashboard. Last one is the C web widget configuration wizard. And this is where things get a little bit complex. So I'll try to explain as best as I can, and then hopefully with this explanation and a little bit of demonstration, it'll make some sense at the end. But this is the most complex part of this entire widget stuff. The web widget configuration wizard is used by the web widgets. And widgets can be what we call configurable. And the idea is then that you have the same widget, but it can behave differently based on configuration. Now, the easiest way I can probably show this to you is by actually going back to the little demo that I had at the start. And if I unlock the dashboard again and I go into edit mode, you can see that these three buttons, they have this little edit icon here. And that edit icon indicates, well, this widget is configurable. So what these buttons do right now, this one, for example, this one navigates to new customer. That's one of the actions the widget can perform. If I go into edit mode and I edit this thing, this is that configuration wizard. This dialog is tailored to this widget, and part of this widget is configurable. In this case, we can configure the widget to perform a different action. This is code that we've written ourselves. Now, instead of navigating to new customer, for example, we could say, well, I'd like a salesperson query. I can save it. So this is still that very same widget, but through the magic of configuration, it now navigates to salesperson. So you don't have to build an entire new widget for this. You can just reuse your own existing widgets through configuration, let it do something new. So how do you go about this then? Well, the idea is that you allow a widget to be configured by allocating what we call configurable properties. These properties can be existing properties, like the PS caption of a button, for example. But you can also create new properties and mark those as configurable. And you do that by going into this little procedure called onGetConfigurableProps. And then we have this little convenience function for you, create configurable prop. And here you mark which property is actually configurable. Your web widget will need a configuration wizard. So you do that by setting phoconfig-wizard to ohmywizard. And this ohmywizard will be an implementation of this configuration wizard class. So this class is basically used as an interface. It's a fancy dialog with some framework code in there to make the configuration wizard do its thing. And we expect you to make either a subclass of this or an object based on this class. If you don't want to do that, we do provide a standard implementation which does some property mapping for you. And that'll work just fine as well. Your custom wizard will probably look nicer though. Okay, so the little schematic that I showed earlier actually isn't as flat as 5 things side by side. It actually looks more like this, right? You have the C web widget container, and inside there is that internal container. Inside that internal container is where your widgets live, and each of these widgets don't need to have a configuration wizard. And then we have the web widget palette on the side, which attaches to your container, which just makes your life a little bit easier when trying to add widgets to a dashboard. Okay, so how does all of this tie in with the existing tech that I previously discussed? Well, the web widget container and the internal container as well, widgets that are inside that internal container are dynamic objects. And the internal container is actually a very fancy subclass of the dynamic object container. This thing defaults to grid layout. It actually only allows grid layout because that's the layout that makes the most sense for a dashboard. And widgets position themselves using grid layout, and resizing uses that as well. This thing supports drag and drop. As you saw, I can drag from the list and drop directly onto a cell to populate my dashboard with a new widget. And it actually has a fancy, slightly modified web drag drop helper internally as well that it uses for moving and pushing the widgets around. And obviously, the C web widgets are built using the composite keyword. Okay, now that we've discussed what the main protagonists are, I would imagine some people in this room are looking a little bit like this guy right now and going, oh, widgets, configuration, container, wrapper, composite, what's going on? And I can understand if you are a little bit lost. So, I think I have about 30 minutes or so left, maybe a little bit more. And instead of using those 30 minutes to ramble off and talk about all of the procedures that you're going to use, all of the properties that you're going to encounter, what all the parameters do, I don't want to do that. It's the end of the day. I don't want to bore you guys to death. So what I'd like to do is do a little walk along. I'd like to take an existing application and quickly, in that 30 minutes, try to add a dynamic dashboard to that application. And hopefully, through this little demo, I'll give you an impression of what a typical first encounter when working with dynamic dashboards will look like. Okay? So a typical flow when starting to integrate dynamic dashboards could look something like this, right? You find a cool project. I bet you guys have plenty. You throw away your existing dashboard. Actually, don't throw it away. You probably want to park that code somewhere because you're probably going to need it. You're going to add the container, and you're going to build some widgets, maybe make them data aware, maybe allow for some configuration. Then you're going to register these widgets with the container. You're going to allow the widgets to be added to the dashboard somehow, through the palette, for example. And then you're going to worry about saving and loading your configuration. Now, in the training yesterday, we went through all of these in detail. But in the training, we had a full day to do this, and we have about 30 minutes left right now. So, again, I want to do a little walk along. I'm going to try and squeeze as much information as possible in 30 minutes time. Therefore, this will be reasonably fast-paced, so stay awake, don't blink. Let's go. So I think Harm was showing this little workspace this morning as well. This is that same resource tracker, that FlexRun application. Very briefly, the idea is that you have these resources, these people right here. You can allocate them to projects, and then you can set how many hours a week they're going to work on this project. Not very complex, doesn't need to be for this kind of thing. But the idea is that you can drag from this and then allocate a resource to a project. You could go into projects, and for example, the Disney presentations. These 3 people, each of them are working a whopping 1 hour a week to prepare the Disney presentations. Okay, but this thing doesn't have a dashboard yet. So how would we go about and adding a dynamic dashboard to an application like this, to a FlexRun application? So we would go into File, New, Web Object, and we've got a couple of new templates to work with, and one of them is the Web Dashboard view. Now we'll call this OVW Dashboard Dynamic. There we go. And just by going through this wizard and adding this view, we are already very much on the right track to getting dynamic dashboards done. So it comes with a widget container and some template code for you to fill out. And it also already comes with this palette, so you immediately get the drag and drop support as well, which is hooked up to the widget container. Now I'm going to very quickly actually make sure that we can access this dashboard. So in here, going to go. The font size is big enough for you guys, right? This is legible, right? Good. Okay, and I'll also set the PHO default view to this dashboard so we don't have to navigate there every time again. So if we run this, we now have an extra view in our application called dashboard, and we get this little edit icon that unlocks our dashboard. This would be the palette, but both of them are empty because we don't have any widgets yet, right? So let's get to work and let's actually start creating our very first widgets. So we're going to go into File, New, Web Objects again. And here we have Web Widget, which gives you a little template for a widget to work with. I will call this Project Details. Sure, let's do that. I have to actually rename this. I will name it C Project Details, yes? We agreed on this yesterday. And this will be the start of my widgets using the composite. Now you already get introduced with a bunch of new properties for this widget. We have the PI default call span and row span here. So whenever you add a widget to your dashboard, it will look at this default, and based on this default, the block will be either bigger or smaller to start with. So if you set 1 and 1 here, it will be a very small block, but 4 and 5, you'll get a larger block. Next, we have the PS widget name, and this needs to be a unique identifier. This is what the container uses so that it knows, okay, well, what widget do I need to add to my dashboard the moment you drop something on top of my container, for example. So this needs to be unique. So let's call this Project Details. Now we have the PS widget caption and the PS widget description. These are both used by the palette to populate the list. This actually shows the name and the description in that list. So make this something that makes sense, right? So this is project details. And this will be shows projects allocation. Because what we want this widget to do is to be able to select a project, and then when we selected a project, we want to be able to see what people are allocated to the project and how many hours a week they are spending. That's the idea. Okay, we are also going to be registering this widget with the container. So you do that by calling on register widget, and you do that in this little procedure right here on register widget. So send register widgets. And then you pass a ref class to this class. It's probably useful if I actually add it first. So project details. And then we go ref class, C project details. There we go. So right now we've created our widget. It is still empty, but we've at least created our widget. And our container knows that we could add this widget to the container at some point. So right now, if we run this again, we click edit, you can see that the list is now actually filled with our project details widget because it knows about it through the container. And we can now actually drag from this palette onto the view, and it will populate the dashboard with our freshly created, but not so exciting widget. So let's make the widget a little bit more exciting. Let's make it so that we can be able to actually select a project. So widgets can be data aware, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is actually add a DDO structure to this widget. We can just go into the DDO Explorer and say, okay, I want to add the project data dictionary. And now I can use this anywhere inside my widget. And I can now say, I want a web combo. I'm going to just drop it into my composite here straight away. I'll actually do it here a little better. There we go. Rename it just real fast. Oh, projects. The label will be projects. And this thing will have an entry item because it's going to be bound to the project name. This thing is going to display the currently selected project name. We are also going to be implementing a little event. We're going to be implementing the onChange. And for that to work, we need to set PB server onChange to true as well, otherwise it doesn't do anything. And in here, we're going to say, okay, whenever the value changes, I want you to perform a new find in my data dictionary so the rest of my widget is up to date with whatever we've selected. So I would say send clear of projects DD here, and then move the new value, which is the project name, to project.name, and say send find of projects DD. And I think the index was 3 for the project name. Yep, there we go. Okay. Always fingers crossed when I click this button, but I think this should work. So right now, our widget looks a little bit more fleshed out. There is actually a combo form in there now. When we click on the drop-down, all of the project names are there, and we can select a project, and this would now perform a find to populate the data dictionary. That's cool, but now we can only select a project, and it still doesn't do anything fancy, does it? So let's make a button that actually navigates to the project details page. So we're going to go back into the class palette again. I'm going to add a web button right here. And this button will say project details. And this thing needs to be able to perform a navigation directly to the Zoom project view where we would like it to display the project details of the project that we had currently selected. Now you'd think that would be pretty complicated, but it really is just web register path and to navigate forward to the, I think it's Zoom project. And then in the onClick, all we have to do is send navigate path, and that'll work. So if we run this again, we should now have a button as well. If we select, for example, Disney presentations, clicked on project details, it will use the information inside the widget's data dictionary to navigate to the project details populated with the correct record. But that's navigation in a nutshell. Okay, so we can now directly navigate to the project details, but it would be nice if we could, through our widgets, immediately see the project allocation. So I've already done a little bit of pre-work for this demonstration just to take some work off my hands and save some time. Inside this workspace, I've added our new charts library, which basically makes it easier to add web charts to a web application. I've done this here in undefined scripts, and this basically imports the necessary stuff for the charts library. Don't want you to worry about this too much. It's more important that we integrate this chart into the widget. That's what matters more. So inside our widget again, I'm going to copy and paste a little bit of snippet code, because otherwise it would just take too long. And again, I don't want to concern you with how the charts work. I want to just add this chart to the widget so you can see what it does. So right now we have a little chart object inside our widget, and then we have this reload chart procedure here, which goes through our data dictionaries, finds the allocation for the project that we selected, and uses that to seed the chart with actual data. All we need to do is make sure that this graph actually gets the instruction to be populated, right? So going back to our combo, to this on change, we would need to call on this reload chart procedure. So send reload chart. So now once we've selected the project, the data dictionary will look up the project, and then it will use that information to say to the chart, okay, well, here's the data that you need. Display it for me, please. Probably also need the project allocation data dictionaries. So let's add those as well. No object to model. No, I was expecting this to work. Let's try this again. Sorry? Ooh, you might be onto something. Maybe I copy and pasted it a little wonky. That might be something. This is my end composites procedure, reload charts, and objects, and objects. Looks good. Face value. I'm gonna cheat a little then. Usually you would go through the DDO Explorer and you'd be able to just add the data dictionary to the widget, but well, lady luck's not on my side when it matters most, it seems. But obviously I rehearsed this a little bit beforehand, so I do have this code already figured out. So I'm just going to copy and paste this over, and that should work. Basically, we're going to be adding the project allocation data dictionary as well, but it needs to do a little bit of constraining and binding, and I don't want to do all of that myself. So there we go. So right now, fingers crossed again. Yes, of course. I need to add the C graph control to this widget. Otherwise, it doesn't know what it is. There we go. Okay. So this widget now, when I select this presentation, should seek to, there we go, populate my chart with data. So in my widget now, I have a data-aware control with a custom control in there. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one of our existing controls. You can actually go get creative and put custom controls in there. And I'm using this custom control to display a fancy graph in a widget. Looks pretty good so far, doesn't it? Okay. How much time do I have left? I got a little bit more. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'd like to show you just one or two more things. I'm going to switch to the finished implementation, because if I have to type everything out, it will probably just take too long. And I've heard our schedule is pretty tight after this. So for the sake of time, I'm going to switch to the finished implementation. what I'll first want to show you is, this is what we did in the training yesterday. We made this widget configurable as well. And what we did there is one thing we did is we allowed for this thing to be preceded with a default project name, because right now when you add a new widget to your dashboard, you have to actually go in and select the project, and then it will populate the chart with data. But it would be nice if you would come back to your dashboard and the data would already be there, right? So that's what configuration could do for you. So this widget now, in the finished version, is configurable. And when I click on this little edit icon here, we created a custom config wizard where we can select one of the projects in the list, and then it would use that project to precede the data dictionary with data and therefore load the chart with that data. So the beauty of that is two things. One, I can actually add the same widget twice. And then through the magic of configuration, I could say Disney presentations here. And now I have the exact same widget twice, but with different data. So I could come into my application and just straight up see the data for these two projects. Beauty also is if I save this, I close my application, and I come back, the configuration is actually stored. So I don't have to go back and select this thing again. Through the magic of configuration, this is all still there. So your dashboard is actually a dashboard that gives you information. So very briefly, how did we go about doing that? We went into this project details widget again, and we created two new properties. One of them was the PS default project name, and this PS default project name would then be used to precede our data dictionary with the data based on the project name. So this would be the property, and then we would go into onGetConfigurable props. And this is where we mark our property as configurable. And here we just said, okay, well, create configurable prop and give a handle to whatever object this prop resides in. In this case, it's the top level, it's in the widget. And then we pass a handle to what the property is called. And then we put that inside this aConfigurable props array. And that'll let the widget and the container know that this thing is configurable, that we can change it at runtime. What we also did is we implemented this onWidget props changed and this onInitialize widget procedure. Both of these do the exact same thing. So in onWidget props change, this gets called every time you change your widget's properties through the configuration wizard. And the onInitialize widget gets called every time the widget is shown for the first time on your dashboard. And in here, we are basically taking this configurable property, this PS default project name, and using it to seed the data dictionary with data. We also created this fancy details config wizard. I won't go into too much detail because this actually gets pretty complex, and the training was more suited for that. But in here, what you could see is that we actually defined this little web switch, this checkbox, and this web list. And we are basically using this configuration wizard. When we click OK, it will look inside this wizard, get the information from the wizard, and feed the values that we've selected back into the widget. And that is how configuration works. And the end result is then that you can, as I showed you, have the same widget multiple times, preceded with data, so it actually looks like a fully functional dashboard. Okay, that's all I have for now. We did skip over quite a few things, but time is short. I don't have a full day to explain everything. But I hope I at least give you an impression of how to work with dynamic dashboards, and you have some idea of how at least the basics work. I do have some closing thoughts, well, one closing thought actually. We've built this with the main goal being dynamic dashboards in mind. But we realized that what we created is actually a fancy container that contains dynamic objects that can be moved around at runtime, they can be configured at runtimes. You don't have to necessarily use this for dynamic dashboards, right? And we kind of expect people over the years to get creative with this. So we're very curious what you guys are going to be using this exciting stuff for. And if you make fancy stuff for this, please let us know. We're very curious. That's my cue. Thank you, guys. Do you have any questions? By all means, go ahead. Do you have any questions? Yes, we did skip over that, but that's a good question. Where is the configuration stored? So by default, the configuration is stored inside your browser's local storage. You don't have to really worry about this much. This just works out of the box. The entire configuration is basically one big container dev struct. It contains the information about your container's grid, and it contains the information about all the widgets that are inside that grid, along with all the configuration for that widget as well. By default, this gets serialized to JSON and then put inside the browser's local storage, which is not very user-safe. So if some other user were to log on, then they would get to see your dashboard. But we do provide hooks on load configuration and on save custom configuration, I think they're called, where you can actually implement your own logic to, for example, store it in a database or retrieve it from a file or whatever you want to do. This was Flextron. Yep, so that works. Yep. Well, in Flextron, there is actually a browser window. So there is a local storage there. So that works. Yep. Anyone else? Yes. Yes. So this is more of a chart-specific question. Can you, in the widget, could you be able to click on one of the pie slices to, I guess, directly navigate to somewhere, right? So this is more of a charts question, not necessarily a widget question, but the charts library that we provide actually maps to various underlying charts library. This one was Chart.js, I think, but we also support high charts and the Syncfusion charts, I think. And we plan to add more along as we go. And I guess depending on which chart library you use, you could actually probably implement stuff like that, yes. Yep. All right, is that it? Cool, then we actually have some decent time to freshen up before tonight's program. Thank you, guys.
So that was the presentation about dashboards. And Dennis, you have monitored the chat. Are there any questions that the viewers had for Harm and Henry?
Yes, we have a few questions. One is how to change the chart type from pie to bar to line, or whatever type you want.
Okay.
Should I take this one?
Yes.
So this is more of a question about, I guess, the charting library that is used in the example. And the charting library itself supports multiple chart types. By the way, the charting library is something that we intend to release in a future day. Probably it supports well, multiple chart types, but also multiple underlying chart library. I think Syncfusion, High Charts, Google Charts, and one more.
Chart.js?
Chart.js, the
Yes.
obvious one. The idea is that you have basically one API to talk to all of these underlying libraries. So if you change the underlying library, your API calls will stay the same. Anyway, multiple chart types is definitely possible. And one way you would go about that is by directly changing that value inside the library itself through the API that you speak to. And then you could probably do that through like configuration, for example, in the widget. You would have to remold the widget that we built a little bit. But through configuration, instead of saying, hey, I want a pie chart, I could say I want a line chart. And then probably the data that we use in the example is still valid. It will just show a different way of displaying that data.
Isn't it like a property that determines the type of chart?
Top of my head, I think it is, yeah.
All right.
Okay. Is there any more questions, Dennis?
Yeah, to get to dashboards, we added several additional features to DataFlex, dynamic grids, grid layout. Now the dashboards are here, are we going to build something based on the dashboards? What's next?
What's next?
What's next? Well, there's a lot of things coming. We're not directly building anything on top of the dashboards. I do think that we do have some small, minor tweaks we want to do to the dashboard stuff, and we're actually more excited to see what you guys are going to build with the dashboard technology, because there's,
Good one.
we think, a lot of different possibilities with it. Product-wise, the big projects that are coming are the package manager and the technology stack project, which of course also is going to really change the landscape of web application development in DataFlex. So that's the stuff that's coming, pretty much. And that's also covered in the next stream, I think. So
Yeah, true. 21 and 22nd of May. So please join that stream.
Shameless plug.
Yeah. I had to. More questions, Dennis.
Yeah, Stuart wants to know, when I have a composite widget open in the studio, the designer models it fine. If I open a composite that's a C web group with some objects in it, is the designer also supposed to model that?
It actually doesn't, I think, but I think the designer actually looks at a meta tag. I think it's called a component type, and that is set on the C web widget, and that is actually what the studio picks up and makes it, model in the designer. And you could set that on your own subclass of the C web group, maybe even on the composite, but I'm not 100% sure if it picks it up then. But yeah, so it's. And I think that component type, you can actually set that without causing any trouble. So just have a look at the C web widget class and see, what meta tags are set to make the studio pick it up. I think that's.
So you're saying they can add that meta tag to their own composite implementation. So say they were making composites. See, my object is a C web group.
Mm-hmm.
They add that meta tag,
Yep.
C web widgets, then it should work.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, more questions, or was this the last one?
We have a couple more.
Oh, wow, a couple.
What's the API to store widgets in custom locations?
Right. So by default, your configuration is stored in the browser's local storage. The way that is done is basically your entire configuration is one big struct, and that struct contains the information about your dashboard itself. So how many rows and how many columns you have, for example. It also contains all of the widgets, the configuration for the widgets, their size, their position, everything. That's one big struct. And the way we store it in local storage is by serializing that to JSON, and then we insert that into the local storage, and it also gets pulled from that whenever the configuration is loaded again. We've added two hooks to also allow for custom configuration saving and loading. That is, from the top of my head, on load configuration for loading and on save custom configuration for storing. And in these hooks, you basically either get past the struct. I think you get past the struct in both of these situations, actually. And one of them expects you to take this struct and fill it with information for the loading, for example. And then for the saving, you get past the entire configuration from whatever is on the client at that time. And you're expected to do something with this struct to store it somewhere. So, for example, you could serialize it to JSON and insert it into a database field that is mapped to your user, for example. That's one of the options.
All right, but you could also put, custom logic in place that fills that struct, with, based on some setting or.
Yeah, you could load it from a config file. You could even write procedural DataFlex code to procedurally generate your entire dashboard.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do. Yep.
All right, nice. So it's similar to how the C web list.
It is similar to how the C web list
its
works.
layout. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Are there more questions?
Hey, last question. Besides widgets, what are other good uses of composite classes? Are there things we should or should not do with them at this point?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, the should not do. Yeah, we're not really sure yet. Actually, I mean, it's a pretty low level language feature, and it has a lot of different usages. I think we could imagine quite a few. I do think that it works especially well with the dynamic object container, which is really what it is built for, pretty much. So you can. When using the dynamic object container, I think it's really natural to use the composite class, and I don't see how that would really go wrong. I've heard some other ideas about using it where I did, in my mind, there were some potential issues also with the studio handling it. And but yeah.
I think I've heard people mention already that they want to put their entire data dictionary structure, for example, inside a composite so that you can just inject it all at once into their code.
Yeah,
which use often.
Yeah, which technically would definitely work, but the studio wouldn't really pick it up. So that's.
We'll see.
Yeah.
That was the last question, Dennis.
That was it.
Okay, perfect. Then I think this is the live stream, and I would like to ask you to conclude the live stream, Dennis.
All right. Thank you, everyone, again for watching. Just wanted to remind you that you can come back to this same URL anytime to watch the live stream again. All of the Q&A answers are going to be posted on the DataFlex.dev website. And we have another live stream on May 21st about the new technology stack. See you then.
Yes, hope to see you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.